6, breaking news. Peaceful protests.
Say his name!
Taking a dangerous turn. Boston erupting into violent clashes over the death of George Floyd.
Stores smashed, merchandise stolen. Rioters on a destructive path throughout the city.
And they robbed us after us being closed for 3 months. This is not anything you should be doing. This is not right.
Already struggling small businesses left to figure out their next steps. We have Team 7 coverage.
This is 7 News Today in New England.
First up here at 6 o'clock, breaking news. Violent protests lasting late into the night. You see a police vehicle. They're burning. Dangerous riots taking over parts of the city, starting in the downtown Boston area where that cruiser was set on fire.
Some rioters clashing with police officers. Also in downtown Crossing, people began throwing things at officers as well as their cruisers.
Stark contrast to how the day started. There was a sea of peaceful protesters marching from Nubian Square to the State House, calling for justice for George Floyd and an end to racial inequality. We're going to keep following all of the angles of this story, and we'll have an update on the protests and the riots all across the country as well. Thanks for starting your Monday here with us. I'm Chris Anderson.
And I'm Amaka Ubaka. First, we want to get a check on your forecast on this Monday morning. It is beginning, of course, of the new month, June 1st, taking you outside, and you see sunshine out there. It's a contrast to all of the activity we saw overnight in the city of Boston, Chris.
Quiet and calm this morning. Temperature-wise, it's a cool start to the day. We're looking at numbers running in the upper 30s and lower 40s. So yes, it is the first day of June. Doesn't feel that way outside. 35 in Orange right now, 38 in Bedford, 49 degrees in Boston, so a little milder in the city, but a crisp start to the day overall with the wind out of the northwest at about 5 to 10 miles an hour. Satellite and radar composite showing not much going on here in southern New England. And do have one disturbance that's going to be dropping on in from southern Canada. That's going to be good enough to trigger off an isolated pop-up shower or two this afternoon. Few and far between, so you can see the coverage area is not all that widespread, and they'll be brief. So I don't expect a lot of rain on the 7-day forecast. Just occasionally you'll have to deal with a passing shower once in a while, but not too much rainfall on the lawns and the gardens. I think we're going to be hand watering again over the next several days for the most part. Temperatures 60s today, 70 tomorrow, 80s by the end of the 7-day forecast ahead.
6:02, let's get a look at the roadways here on your Monday morning. Here's Palak Manjari.
All right, I want to take you right to the maps this morning. The only thing to really mention right now is that there is an object on the road. This is on 93 northbound in Woburn. Just be cautious. There are 2 lanes closed in that area if you are heading out that way. But otherwise, the expressway looking very nice this morning. I do want to give you a look at your drive times as you travel out the door this morning. Let's take a look at what those are. Probably around 10 minutes. There you go, a perfect 10. Also want to let you know, because of the demonstrations overnight, certain stations are being bypassed if you are heading on the T. So keep in mind for that. If you want more information, just head to MBTA.com.
All right, back to our breaking news on this Monday. Thousands of people in Boston protesting racial injustice and the death of George Floyd.
And it started with a peaceful protest, continued for hours, but it didn't stay that way. As the evening began with a sea of people marching from Nubian Square to the State House peacefully, holding up signs and chanting along the way. When the sun set, though, things took a turn, a big turn. Crowds of protesters clashing with police in downtown Crossing, some throwing bottles and rocks at those officers. Tear gas was used to break things up.
And a block away and just a short time later, protesters setting a Boston police cruiser on fire, bright flames billowing from that car. And the Walgreens in downtown Crossing, the first of many businesses to be looted, some smashing their way through the storefront windows, taking merchandise from inside. We're covering everything on the protests here in Boston and across the country, as well as the major destruction. Let's go out live to 7's Carrie Corrado with more on the clashes between police and protesters. Carrie.
Amaka, good morning. Everything is trashed here. Now that the crowds have left, we're able to get a better view at some of the damage that was done overnight. One example is this Walgreens right at downtown Crossing. The windows were shattered. Looters could jump right in, grab what they want, and then jump right out. I also want to show you what it looks like all over the sidewalks. If you follow me a little bit, we're stepping on some glass over here just to give you an idea. We can see all of the items from the store all over the sidewalk, all of the glass, and this is just some of the damage. Peaceful protests taking a chaotic turn. Dramatic video shows a police officer surrounded in his own cruiser. That officer escaping unharmed. Protesters seen jumping on the car and tearing it apart. Moments later, and just feet away, a second cruiser set on fire. Sky 7 capturing the police car in flames. The big ball of fire lighting up the night sky. The violence erupting throughout the city streets just after 9 o'clock Sunday night. Demonstrators shifted away from the State House and made their way to Tremont Street and downtown Crossing. It was at that moment the crowds grew angry. Police officers worked through the night to push protesters back and stop the looting and destruction. Boston police say protesters were throwing water bottles and other projectiles at officers. At one point, tear gas was used to disperse the crowds. In the meantime, our 7 News van was also attacked. A huge rock shattering the windows with our crew inside. Another news car also smashed while covering the protests. So back out here live, this is a look straight through the shattered windows of this Walgreens in downtown Crossing. We are told by Boston police that there are 7 injured officers that were taken to the hospital. Many more were treated at the scene, but of course those numbers can change throughout the morning. We will keep you updated, but a lot of cleanup throughout the morning. We're live in Boston. Carrie Corrado, 7 News, Today, New England.
Rioters turning their attention to stores, smashing their way through the glass, getting away with stolen merchandise from inside. 7's John Coco is live with more on this part of our coverage. John, we see the damage behind you, too.
Well, Amaka, this was a violent night. It was a chaotic night, and certainly one that the city will not forget. If you take a look behind me here, you'll see why. Many stores look exactly like this one, with the glass smashed and push in. And if you go just next door, you can see exactly what I mean. Another store right here. This looks to be a jewelry store with its glass smashed. You're looking directly into the store right now. Chaos in Boston overnight as looters smash stores across the city, including this Walgreens in downtown Crossing. A fire was also set inside the store, which started as something peaceful, turned violent as protesters and police clashed. Officers also responded to reports of looting at several stores on Newbury and Boylston Street. You can see some of the damage being done here. Storefronts with glass broken as people run inside, taking what they can. More police deployed to the Back Bay later in the night as looting continued. And I wanted to show you, this is across the street from where we were standing earlier, just to give you an idea that this isn't just one small section of Newbury Street where we were this morning. It's up and down the street here, along with some graffiti that we have on some windows and glass as well. So there's a lot of damage here. Some of the cleanup has already started, and we continue to see police still going through the streets here as well. That's the latest live on Newbury Street. John Coco, 7 News, Today, New England.
I'm protecting my business, and they've robbed us after us being closed for 3 months. This is not anything you should be doing.
The rioting and looting bringing a major blow to businesses across the city. Many were preparing, at least, to reopen their doors for the first time in months because of COVID-19. Now, there's a lot of cleanup to do, plus the loss of so much of their inventory. Elena Pinto, live with more on the work crews that now have their hands full. Elena.
We've seen plenty of work crews, and they're out here this morning. If you take a look behind me, they're working at this shop called Barber, but they started around 1 o'clock this morning on Newbury Street alone. And it's, 6 o'clock, and they've only made it a few blocks. So they're continuing to board up every store they see that has been damaged. The glass is on the ground, and the debris lines the streets of Newbury Street. And overnight, we were able to speak with a small business owner on Newbury Street who was emotional, saying his entire store is empty after being closed amid the COVID-19 pandemic.
I'm protecting my business, and they've robbed us after us being closed for 3 months. This is not anything you should be doing. This is not right. What are you trying to protect a cause? This is an excuse, nothing else. You're making an excuse. We got robbed, we're small business. We can't even pay rent.
He says there were many people inside his store, the city smoke shop, at the time he was robbed, and he was there protecting his store. He was able to hold somebody there, though that person could not be arrested at the time. He says he pays $50,000 a month for rent on Newbury Street. And back out here live, they're still working to board up this store. And again, this crew here will be working their way down the street all morning long. We've already saw some street sweepers make passes on Newbury Street trying to clean up the debris that the looters have been taking through the streets. Just shoe boxes, shoes, bags, tissue paper, everything. So we'll keep up on these cleanup efforts throughout the morning. Live in Boston, Elena Pinto, 7 News Today, New England.
Elena, thank you. Most protesters not engaging in all the violence. Ariel, show the contrast between the crowds. People outside of the State House remaining calm. And just across the common, crowds began clashing with responding police officers. 7's Polixeni Manjari is here in the newsroom with more on the peaceful start to the day. Polixeni?
Now the group marching all the way from City Hall to Boston Common to deliver their message. It started as a Sunday with peaceful protests across Boston, a series of rallies calling for justice in the death of George Floyd and other Black Americans.
More violence is not going to solve anything.
Thousands on hand for demonstrations that span the city, from a clergy-led march in Roxbury to one from Nubian Square to the State House.
It's important for me to come here because this has been going on for years, for eons of years.
Some protesters kneeling for several minutes in memory of Floyd. And as the sun sets, a sea of people in front of the Massachusetts State House. After nearly 6 hours of peaceful protests, the crowd beginning to disperse as the city's coronavirus curfew took effect.
The only message there is to deliver is that until we get justice for George Floyd and for all the people who've been affected by the same circumstances, this won't stop.
Many saying they hope the day of action carried a strong message.
The message would only be understood if we come in peace.
Now, the peaceful demonstration lasted for several hours before protests turned violent around 9 o'clock last night. In the newsroom, Polixeni Manjari, 7 News Today, New England.
Boston not the only city dealing with protesting and violence. In Minneapolis, where George Flynn died while in police custody, a driver is facing charges for speeding through a group of protesters. We want to go to Juliana Mazza, who's here in the newsroom with more of that story, plus what else is happening across the country.
Right, Chris. At least 15 states now have called in the National Guard, including Massachusetts, to help control the thousands of people coming out to protest now 6 days following the deadly arrest.
We just want justice for George Floyd.
Protests continue across the country in the death of George Floyd, the man who died in Minneapolis police custody last week. From Washington, D.C., where fires burned as demonstrators crowded the White House fence, to Chicago, where a curfew was put in place after violence over the weekend. A curfew also in effect in Atlanta after officers were fired over a rough arrest on Saturday. And in Philadelphia, more looting and unrest. Around 5,000 National Guard members have been activated in 15 states to take on rioters, including in Los Angeles, where the mayor says destruction of property needs to stop.
But they have not just caused chaos and damage. They are hijacking a moment and a movement and changing the conversation.
Demonstrations also continuing in Minneapolis, where George Floyd died 1 week ago today, and now former police officers charged with his murder. The police chief publicly reaching out to Floyd's family amid the protesting.
I would say to the Floyd family that I'm absolutely devastatingly sorry for their loss. And if I could do anything to bring Mr. Floyd back, I would move heaven and earth to do that.
So the Minneapolis police chief said that the 3 officers that were present during Floyd's death are also complicit. They have not been charged. We'll continue to follow the latest developments. Live in the newsroom, Juliana Mazza, 7 News Today in New England.
Boston lawmakers have been reacting to the protesting and the violence that happened throughout the city overnight. Governor Charlie Baker issued a statement saying, in part, I want to express my gratitude to all of the police officers and other first responders working to protect the people of Boston from the individuals whose violent actions, looting, and property destruction was criminal and cowardly. Boston Mayor Marty Walsh also commenting on the violence, saying, "I am angered by the people who came into our city and chose to engage in acts of destruction and violence, undermining their message. If we are to achieve change and if we are to lead the change, our efforts must be rooted in peace and regard for our community." Mayor Walsh is expected to talk more about the weekend's protests, along with the violence, the rioting, and the looting. It's set to happen at noon today. When the mayor does speak, you can watch it live right here on 7 News.
All right, still ahead on 7 News Today, New England, on your Monday morning. Certain tobacco products now off store shelves. The first of its kind ban taking effect in Massachusetts today.
Plus, Governor Charlie Baker is set to take early action today as the state nears phase 2 of his reopening plan.
Cool start to June. Temperatures upper 30s and low 40s outside Boston, even 49 in the city. So it is a crisp start to the day. A couple of clouds in the mix, as well as an isolated shower or two. Timing of that, what to expect over the next 7 days ahead.